For that kind of content, the authenticity of the localization is absolutely crucial, because at the end of the day, entertainment is all about the suspension of disbelief, right?
And welcome everyone to Slator Pod. Today on the podcast, we welcome Stuart Green. So Stuart's the CEO of media localization and production services provider Zoo Digital, a company we've spoken about many times in this podcast. I'm really excited to have Stuart on the pod. They're publicly listed in London, $60 million market cap. And one of the reasons why we have Stuart here today is they published a report called Will Robots Take Over the World of Localization? So we really needed to have you on the podcast. So hi, Stuart, and thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for inviting me, Florian. Appreciate it.
What part of the world are you recording this from? Are you in London today?
I'm actually not in London today. I'm in Sheffield, which is a couple of hours north of London.
Good. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Zoo has a kind of production offices, everything in Sheffield, right?
That's right. Yeah. Our headquarters are in Sheffield, but yeah, we have facilities in London and a bunch of other places too.
Absolutely. So, well, first, tell us a bit more about Zoo. Tell us about your background, how you got into media localization, and just a bit of background for our viewers and listeners.
Sure. Well, I should kind of start with a confession. So I'm not a linguist. I feel somewhat embarrassed to say that on your podcast, but that is not my background. My personal background actually is in tech. So I did a degree in computer science long time ago, and I've been in the software industry ever since then. So Zoo Digital was formed in 2001. It was actually a combination of a couple of companies, one of which I was running back then. And in the early days, the company was doing something somewhat different from what we do now. But in around 2004, 2005, we got involved in the entertainment industry with developing some tech that was used particularly to do with the production of DVD video titles. And that kind of led us on a journey where we recognized actually the way that the entertainment industry was operating back then in relation to creating multilingual versions of content, primarily on for the DVD distribution, was somewhat lacking. It was very inefficient. It didn't scale very well. There were supply chain issues. We were doing one technical part and working with a partner who did the localization. They took a long time. They made lots of mistakes. And we kind of saw that as an opportunity, really, because Zoo's origins are as a tech company. And we tend to, first and foremost, we think about the problems we look to solve as those where tech can play a big part. And throughout our history, and obviously we've been in this industry now for 20 plus years, workflow management, automation, that has been sort of the nuts and bolts of what we do, and all the services that we provide now, because actually we are a service company, and we provide these services in localization and other areas too. They're all delivered using our proprietary technology. So we're innovators in this space. We look for ways to make things efficient, scalable, and hence, obviously a huge interest that we've had in AI, and it's something we've been looking at for over 10 years.
One of the key differentiators until the whole AI wave kind of broke loose was also the remote dubbing that Zoo provided, right? Can you tell us a bit more about that and what drove innovation there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was an innovation that began actually before the pandemic. It was just somewhat timely, actually. But our first foray into localization was to do with actually adapting text content that's used on DVD products. And from then we got into subtitling. So subtitling was the first sort of multimedia localization work that we did, and we built the first ever cloud-based subtitling production platform, which we still operate today. It's enormously enhanced since then. It's a platform called Zoo Subs. It's used by our large network of 12,000 freelance translators around the world. And dubbing was always on our journey, but it's a bigger nut to crack. There's plenty of work for us to focus on subtitling to keep us busy for a while, but eventually we got to actually look at dubbing and understand how that industry works. The traditional ways of producing dub soundtracks and so on, and recognize that the traditional approach to dubbing is very studio centric, right? So you have a physical dubbing studio in every location where you want to create a dubbed track. And what that means is that actors and dubbing directors and technicians and others will travel to that location, and they will work together on that production. So you have a very sort of quite a capital intensive arrangement by which that work is done. And we recognize that, okay, so we could develop some tech that could do some heavy lifting here, because the way in which that traditional ecosystem works is using primarily a piece of technology called Pro Tools, which is, one of the world's leading digital audio workstations. An incredibly powerful, capable system, a best of breed type product, but is a generalist product. And one of the things that we've always done through our journey is to look at specific use cases, specific instances where we're trying to find a solution, and think about, okay, well, is a generalist solution the right one here? Would a more focused, purpose-built solution actually serve us better? So if you look at, for example, in the early days when we started to work in localization, the project management tool of choice amongst all our peers was Microsoft Excel. Now, don't get me wrong,
they're not
Microsoft
alone with
Excel. Absolutely. I mean, and still today, don't get me wrong, Microsoft Excel is an incredible product. It is so versatile. It is used in so many different areas, not just, at Zoo in our finance team, but for tracking information and for all sorts of things. It's an amazing product. But it is very much, a generalist product. It started out as something quite specific for people to basically produce financial statements. And now it's this incredible multi-purpose, general purpose tool. But we kind of looked at that and said, well, okay, that's great. And if you're managing, a handful of projects and you need to track assets with translators, of a modest number, it's fine. But we were very much focused on scalability and how we can actually extend the volume of work that we could process through the same number of people. And identified, of course, that actually, if you have a purpose-built workflow management system that is tracking all these steps in your process, so you don't require project managers to remember to have to go into that spreadsheet and fill that cell in and remember to update it when that translator has done their bit of work and who it's going to go to next and so on. If you have a system that essentially manages that for you, a proactive system, then you can be so much more efficient. So, our first system for, not our first, but our system for subtitling essentially has integral workflow management capabilities, which tracks the whole process. It means that in general, project managers can really focus on where they can add value the most. Because when things are running smoothly and, person A does their work, it triggers person B to do their work and so on, then project managers don't need to be involved. The system will track that and manage that for you. So where project managers tend to get involved is where things are not going so well, where they need to intervene, they need to problem solve, engage with translators to figure out some issues that they're having. So they get to be more productive, for one thing, and that's clearly good for us from a financial standpoint, but they also get to be more fulfilled in what they do, because it's much more fun and engaging to be working on those kinds of problems rather than the routine administrative filling cells in a spreadsheet and so on. So Zoo Dubs is our dubbing platform, to finally get to your question, Florian. So when we looked at the way in which the dubbing ecosystem operated, we recognized that actually having this general purpose digital audio workstation is great, but if you had something special purpose that was designed around the workflows associated with multilingual dubbing for entertainment content, then you could do something extraordinary. You can streamline the processes. You can build workflow automation into them. You can enable talent to be. You can avoid them having to be co-located. You can work in a distributed way. So if you have one of your actors working in Chicago in a little studio there, another one in New York, another one in Buenos Aires, you can get that whole thing to work pretty seamlessly. Each one of them needs to be working in a location where they can produce great quality sound. So clearly, if there are barking dogs in the background and echoes in the room, that's clearly not going to work. So you still have the need to have an environment in which you can record, but you don't have the logistical nightmare of co-locating everyone. And of course, that nightmare is problematic in lots of levels. Just diarization. Just finding times when actors can be available to travel and to be in one place. What we found with our system is that we were able to turn projects around almost overnight for clients who just suddenly had this urgent need, even though their talent was spread around in lots of cities, because we were able to locate for them a place where they could individually go and do their recordings, and our system essentially connects them all with the appropriate technicians and dubbing directors and so on in different locations, and thereby enabling them to achieve just as good a result, if not a better result. So there's no compromise to quality here, but it enables that whole ecosystem to be so much more productive. And to finally get to your question about the pandemic, it just so happened that we had developed that just before the pandemic. So when the pandemic did arrive, we already had an out-of-the-box solution for remote recording, and were immediately inundated with customers whose existing vendors weren't practically able to operate because people couldn't travel and they couldn't be co-located and so on.
It must have been a busy few weeks. Also,
ramping up busy.
Servers and everything, just handling the sheer volume that's coming in. I want to talk a lot more about localization, also about AI, but I also want to just briefly know a bit more about what you call the technical media services business. So just to kind of close that. So this is also a sizable part of Zoo. So can you just tell those that are mostly focused on localization, what is it and why does it make sense for you to still, or to keep that business, have that business? Why? What kind of synergies are you getting from that business for localization?
So our customers are producers of TV series, feature films, and in most cases they're distributors of that content. So they go to someone to make a new show and make a new program. And what that party does is deliver to them these kind of pristine copies, if you like, or a pristine copy of that program. So very high resolution, very high bit rate, very high quality audio, video, metadata, and so on. At that point, it's not in a form to be distributed. It's way too big. It's hundreds of gigabytes big. You can't just pipe that through Netflix or whatever. So there's work that you need to do to adapt that content so that it works properly on each platform through which it's going to be distributed, whether it's Netflix or Disney Plus or Hulu or whatever that might be. And what we have found over the years is that our customers, it simplifies their job if they can work with vendors who can take care of the whole thing, who can say, here you go, here's this finished show, go at it. We need it in 40 subtitle languages and another 25 dubbing languages, and we want to deploy it on Amazon Prime and Netflix. And so we can take care of that whole thing. So so what we're providing is a turnkey solution within which those technical things. So we refer to them as media services, but it covers a very wide range of different things that are all to do with getting materials in the right technical formats, making sure they're all properly synchronized, they work together, there are no glitches, there are no popping pixels on your screen and so on. So there's a whole bunch of technical stuff, and the reason it's an important part of what we do is because it's very convenient for our customers to essentially just take that whole thing and hand it over to us.
So for the traditional, maybe not traditional, but like the text translation industry that may look to branch out into media localization, it would seem that this is a very difficult part for them to even understand, maybe get their heads around, get the assets, the infrastructures spun up, right? So, I mean, with your technical background and also the media background, that was more natural. Maybe that was even the core initially, and then you expanded from there. But the other way around seems to be a lot more difficult, I would assume.
I think that is probably true. I mean, and you're right. We actually, the work we started with was more that technical kind of work. That's where we came from, and we layered, in fact, over time, we layered on the localization on top of that. And it's not one thing. It's not. It's like, okay, subtitling is many things because there are many languages. So but subtitling in French is kind of one thing. But it's media services is basically a whole bucket of different things. It requires you to understand the real technical characteristics of each of the formats in which those original materials can be delivered to you, and there are many. and also the all the technical specifics of the delivery formats that you're required to hand on to your customer or the distributor, and how all those things get packaged together. So it's, so we have a fantastic team of people who just understand all the ins and outs of this, of audio and video, and how the metadata kind of gets put together and so on. So it is a very, very involved piece of our business.
All right, let's talk about the white paper you published last month, and you boldly called it, "Will Robots Take Over the World of Localization?" I love that title in its simplicity. It reads like a kind of a headline, right? And it's rare that a company that's even publicly listed will go out with kind of a report title like that. That's so clear and bold.
Well, you say it's bold, but it's a question.
You're right. Well, it's bold in its simplicity, right? And just putting that question right out there. So what prompted you to write it, and how did you go about putting it together, drafting it, who was involved, etc.?
Well, the first thing, I don't think we've touched on this already, but Zoo is a quoted company, a listed company on the London Stock Exchange, on the kind of junior market, the AIM market of the London Stock Exchange. And of course, we have that. What that means is that we have investor shareholders who we need to keep informed. That's part of my job, to have those dialogues with investors and shareholders, to persuade new prospective investors that they may want to take a look at Zoo. And AI, of course, those are the two letters on everyone's lips and have been for the last couple of years. Not just in our sector, obviously, but in every sector. So these questions were coming up, time and time again, and it's in a short investor meeting, it's quite difficult to cover off the subtleties of what we do and the applications of AI. Where it can work really well. Where it's not so helpful, and importantly, of course, for investors, what that means from an economic standpoint. How does what sort of transformation effect can that have on the profitability of our business? The margins that we deliver, the rate at which we can grow. So I have to say that actually the key impetus for this, from my personal perspective, has been through those dialogues with investors, and really wanted to be able to provide something that kind of sets that out for them, hopefully clearly, hopefully in in language that is easy to comprehend. We're not trying to blind with science, and sets out the case really. And obviously a key point that we want to make here is that we do see AI as being a great opportunity. We don't see it as a threat, and that's clearly a concern that some of our investors and shareholders have had. But also, we wanted to state our position in our industry, and clearly this is a dialogue around AI with our customers, has been ongoing for some time, and we felt that it made sense for us to kind of combine those two things and put them together and provide something that could be helpful to kind of both of those audiences. Sometimes it's difficult to do a one-size-fits-all with these things, but I hope we've done something that actually works and is and people can learn from, and it challenge maybe some of their assumptions. And of course, there will still be skeptics after reading it, but I hope we achieve that. It's AI for us is something that we've been looking at for, as I mentioned, for over 10 years. It's only relatively recently we've seen advances in the tech and the capability and the models that are being built there that start to make it interesting to what we do. So we kind of approached it. There were multi-parties internally who contributed ideas, thoughts, themes. We have an R&D team. So we have our in-house R&D team that works on all our technologies, and a team that is focused on AI and advances and evaluating third-party products, as well as innovating with our own solutions and integrating those capabilities with the platforms that we've created.
I think it's interesting also that you explain a lot how Zoo works. So it's not like a kind of puffy, nice picture, white paper with 8 pages that you could squeeze down to 2. I think it's about 40 pages. It explains a lot of the intricacies and nuances of how you work. And then you have that, of course, that AI kind of element on top. So did you produce this exclusively internally, or did you work with okay.
Exclusively internally, yeah
one consent. So well, if you met an investor in an elevator and you had 30 seconds, what's the kind of top 3 takeaways before we go into the details?
Well, I guess the first thing is that, AI is a really exciting new development in the industry. And, I think for lots of people, it feels it's come out of nowhere, but actually it's been in development for decades, right? But the recent advances are really interesting, really exciting, and offer kind of the prospect of sort of transformational change in lots of areas, including what we do. So I think that's the first thing, that this is an exciting thing. It's certainly not something to be feared. It is something to be embraced and to seek opportunity in, and that's exactly our attitude towards it. For what we do at Zoo, our customers are the big film studios and streaming companies that everyone has heard of, and for them. They're dealing with high value content. So this is programming that has cost millions, maybe tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars to produce. And for that kind of content, the authenticity of the localization is absolutely crucial. Because at the end of the day, entertainment is all about the suspension of disbelief, right? So obviously it's easy to think about that in terms of the original program and having actors who look plausibly like they're playing the parts of real people and speaking the words of those people. But of course, when you adapt that into different languages for distributing it within different countries and for different cultures, you have to preserve that authenticity. So if authenticity is absolutely fundamentally important, then we don't see AI as a substitute. So that's the second point, that AI isn't a substitute today for what we do for those high-end clients. And actually, the way that we see AI is, in the paper we call it as, we think of it as an artificial assistant. It's something that we can use to add value, to help the talent to be more efficient, to be more engaged and more fulfilled in what they do. So, back to my example earlier, empower them so that they don't have to do those administrative things. They don't have to do tedious steps. If the AI can help them kind of cut through that and really focus on the parts where they personally can add value. And therefore, for us, it's a technology not to replace those incredible talents in localization. That's not just translators, but it's obviously it's voice actors and dubbing directors and a whole bunch of other folks. It's for us, it's all about an artificial assistant helping them to do their work in a better way.
You seem to be taking a firm stance for continuing human involvement, as opposed to many others who are basically just messaging AI right now. That's all they're doing, and that they're not kind of adding that human element at all. It's all about AI. So don't you think that may be risky for you, at least from a kind of perceptual perspective? I think some others are just saying, well, we're doing whatever we're doing with humans and experts and everything, but we're signaling AI. But you're like, no, we're doing both, right? And so from a perceptualist perspective, looking towards the investors, is that maybe a little bit risky, or you don't seem to be thinking that?
It's a great question, actually. Whether it's risky, and I think there's a danger if we don't present this in the right way, that we seem to be in denial on this. Actually, that's far from the truth. We are embracing these technologies. We're already using them in certain places, and we are technologists at the end of that. If there's anyone in our sector amongst our peers, if there's any company there that is likely to want to embrace and innovate with these things, of the established providers, then obviously we're in that sweet spot. I think what you're seeing, and maybe what you're referring to there, is all of the kind of pretty recent startups who have kind of come very much more from a tech background, as it did, of course, we did, but are seeing this as AI as a tool that can solve problems. And I guess my kind of word of caution of that is that just because you can use AI for these things doesn't necessarily mean you should. And I think the key really is in understanding what AI can do at any point in its evolution. So, we looked at that 10 years ago. We didn't think that it could help us. It's come on leaps and bounds. We now think there are some areas where it can help us. In another few years, it will be able to help us even more types of applications. I think there are some I think of sort of the emergence of AI and what's happening, particularly in the markets and in the media at the moment, as having parallels with what happened in the internet boom. And I'm old enough to remember that very clearly. You know, so in 2000 when this thing called, you know, the public internet suddenly seemed to emerge out of nowhere. Everybody got awfully excited about it. And there were a gazillion startup companies who jumped on that bandwagon, you know, tech specialists saying, okay, here's some tech, we can use that to do a whole bunch of different things. So lots of companies doing lots of different things. I actually was it with one of those companies way back. But of course that, you know, that exuberance kind of wore off because investors kind of started to think, well, what is the return on investment we're going to get out of these organizations? Because they're obviously consuming a lot of cash whilst they get their proposition to the stage it needs to be. And is that going to actually provide us with a return on investment? And obviously, investors were spooked. There was this big bursting of the bubble, as it was called at the time. You know, the whole kind of market collapsed. And it took a long time for things to pick back up again. Obviously, wind forward to today, so we're nearly a quarter of a century on. The internet is such a profound piece of pretty much everything that we do in the world. So it was, you know, lots of these things were just ahead of their time. You know, things weren't ready, and so on. So I think what we're seeing at the moment is lots of startup companies who are seeing this, this technology and are smart and know how it can be used. In terms of how they can apply that as a pure tech. The question is whether the use cases are there in a form that AI can truly add value in an economic way. I think that's the big question around AI, and not just in localization or our sector or entertainment, but just right across the board. I mean, that is the big question. I think that investors must be having, if they're not, they should be, around AI as they pump money into these startup companies that seem to be going like a rocket. But at some point, those companies will be valuable only if they can generate cash from that business. And if the consumption of capital to get to that point is so great, there's a question whether actually they have a viable pursuit. So I think AI is incredible technology, but you have to kind of understand it for what it is. And if we've got time, you know, I could talk a little bit about, you know, how I see the sort of current generation of AI, the algorithms that are being used there, you know, how they work, how it's easy. The white paper goes into this, you know, just read the white paper, you know, how it's easy to make inferences from that and to kind of assume that this thing is some kind of sentient being because it says stuff that is so beautifully worded, you know, just like a human would say it, and it seems so pertinent. But you know, you have to understand what it's doing, what's actually happening under the hood. It can be very deceptive, and if you form those judgments about what it's actually doing that are at odds with what it's truly doing, then you may misinterpret its capabilities. And I think there is an element of that at the moment. So I think, you know, for us, you know, this is something we do understand very well. So we understand where it can be used to add value at the moment, where it's not quite ready yet, but we think it will be in a few years' time. And those areas also where we think, not sure whether the economic cost of solving this problem is actually going to be worth it at the end of the day.
I mean, in terms of the return on investment, I think the current narrative is like we've pumped 200 billion into it. We've generated about 20 billion of revenue, you know, with 10x the amount of investment. So yeah, it will be interesting to see if there's even a slight popping of the AI bubble, and we'll notice, or if it's just kind of a slightly less bubbly environment that kind of goes into something more productive eventually. But yeah, currently you see a lot of companies, I mean, startups, because it's so easy to take one of these models, build something light on top, and then hope for traction, and then go more enterprise, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
In your executive summary, you're saying basically for premium and entertainment content, the capabilities of current AI systems fall significantly short. You also say that AI cannot understand context or read between the lines sufficiently enough, you know, from like speaker background to mood and body language and things like that. So why don't we discuss where you see it fall significantly short currently, and maybe let's focus on the elements that you see being very tough to crack even in the next 3 to 5 years, right? With just pure raw AI. I mean, assuming we're not just watching AI generated movies eventually, but like, let's say that current production process holds more or less intact.
Well, I guess the place to start is just to think about, we work in the entertainment industry, right? But it's that's a very kind of broad area, and it's becoming increasingly broad. At the one extreme, you've got movies that cost literally hundreds of millions of dollars to produce 100 minutes of output. At the other extreme, you've got YouTube creators who are filming themselves playing a video game that costs buttons to make. All entertainment, and a very wide range of different subcategories, as you go across that spectrum, and different things are important depending on which of those different areas that you're considering. So with kind of very diverse sort of types of different content and sources and budgets to produce that content, that calls for different kinds of trade-offs. And obviously the classic trade-off is sort of quality versus cost. It applies anywhere. If I get someone in to decorate, my house, I can go with a guy who's not done it much before. He's fresh out of school. He's pretty slapdash. He's really quick and he's really cheap. So, I get my house decorated. The quality's not great, but it didn't really cost me a lot. On the other hand, I can hire a very seasoned decorator who's done it a long time, who prepares meticulously, tapes up all around the windows, and there are no splashes on any glass in his work. It takes him a long time, but he produces a fantastic result. But I pay a lot more for that. That's obviously that applies in so many different areas, and it applies here when we think about localization of entertainment. It applies there too. So, and I suppose importantly, I want to return to something that I mentioned earlier around what's important to our customers. When we talk about quality in entertainment localization, a big part of that is authenticity. You think of quality often as a technical thing. So if you have you used the right words to translate something? When an actor speaks, can you hear a dog barking in the background? And so on. But authenticity actually is key to this market, because it is, as I mentioned earlier, all about the suspension of disbelief. You're trying to draw someone in and tell them a story, and for the duration of those 100 minutes or that 30-minute episode or whatever it is, you want them to be absorbed by that and experience it as though this thing is real. And of course, a lot of care and attention is taken in preparing the original program. So and that comes down to how they film it, how they cast it, how they direct the actors in their performances, how they deliver their lines and so on. But also the words that they speak, the script that has been prepared for those actors to say. So if you think about a program, think about a drama program, say, that you watch and enjoy in your native language, and all the things about that create that immersive experience, that suspension of disbelief. The challenge for localization is to recreate that for an audience who doesn't speak that native language, whether they are reading subtitles or listening to a dub soundtrack. So all those principles that were important when you made that show, that you spent millions of dollars making, remain equally important for these translation assets, these localization assets, because of course now gone are the days when localization was an afterthought to big budget program production. No, it is fundamentally thinking about the appeal to audiences globally is fundamentally a big part of what is considered before shows are greenlit. So that most of the people watching this program are not going to be native speakers of the original language, and therefore you've got to think, how can we maximize the appeal to those folks, and adapt the content, and therefore adapt the content in a way that rings true to them, that is authentic. So to your question then about, where what's the trajectory then for AI? Does it have what role it has to play here today and in the future? So as I say, when you're talking about subtitles and the dubbing script, for folks who experience that content in a language other than its original version, they are the story. They embody those subtitles. That script, that dubbing script, is the story. It's not an afterthought. It's not a kind of bolt on. It is an integral part of that experience. There's a really simple example. You'll see there are lots and lots of examples that I can use to illustrate. There's an interesting one just to reflect on in the that we use in the white paper, and it's a quote from Silence of the Lambs, the movie with this character Hannibal Lecter. So for those of your podcast listeners who have not seen that, Hannibal Lecter is a cannibal. And there's a line that he says in that movie to someone where he says, "I'm having an old friend for dinner." Okay, so just kind of let's just kind of break that down a little bit. So if it's not, perhaps some of your listeners are not native speakers of English, and maybe the subtlety in that line may not be immediately obvious. So obviously. In England, if we were inviting a friend over to eat with us, you might say, "I'm inviting my friend for dinner." You could say, "I'm having a friend for dinner," but the intention clearly there would be that they are coming to join you. You're going to sit down at the table together and consume that meal side by side. But there's an ambiguity in what Hannibal Lecter says. "I'm having an old friend for dinner." It's like I'm having paella for dinner. So there's an inherent ambiguity in that utterance. So think about what AI needs to be able to solve that. And obviously you may think this is a somewhat obscure case, but I think it's just illustrative of just the nuance in conversational language, basically. And what you need to understand to appreciate what he's actually saying here, and therefore adapt it in a way that preserves the authenticity, i.e., perpetuates that ambiguity in what he says, is probably three things. First of all, you need to understand that actually the speaker is a cannibal. That's quite key to the subtlety here. Secondly, you need to understand that there is ambiguity in the utterance. That on face value it means one thing. Actually, what he means is a completely different and far more sinister thing. And then the third thing, and this is something to really reflect on. You have to understand that the ambiguity is intentional. That's when you think about it, that's quite a profound thing, because obviously there's lots of ambiguity in lots of things we say, the vast majority of which is unintentional. But here, that ambiguity was intentional. So, this is just a very simple illustration, but hopefully it highlights that it's not just about what people say, it's about what they intend by what they say. So if you're a novel writer, what you're in your novel writing 101 class, what you're told is show don't tell. The show don't tell is a widely employed technique for novel writing. That's a narrative technique, in which the intention is to allow the reader to experience a story through actions, through words, of course, but particularly thinking about vocabulary and so on, the way the different characters speak in that, through thoughts, senses, feelings, and so on. It's the idea is that you're allowing the reader to draw their own conclusions. So what that tells you is that for literary works, it's about creating an experience. It's not spelling out. It's not this man went to the shop and bought a loaf of bread. It's about giving a narrative around the facts of that situation to portray a mood, a sense of was he anxious when he was doing it? And all those things that's a multimodal experience. That comes not from just the utterances that character speaks, but it comes from their body language, the kind of person they are, their mood that day, who they're speaking to, whether that's someone who is familiar to them or unfamiliar, a whole bunch of different things, and these are the things that to to localize entertainment content, particularly the scripted drama series, for example, you need to kind of get under the skin of that. You need to do that. Think about it from that show not tell. That the words are just one part of the whole entertainment experience. And for AI to be able to help you with that and be able to kind of automate that process, AI needs to understand the entire context, not just the words that were said and said, okay, this person has said X. In my training data, I've seen utterances like that or similar to that a gazillion times. Here I know is a reliable translation of that utterance into this target language. That may, of course, that will work some of the time, but it won't create a compelling entertainment experience for an audience. And of course, and I'm not saying that AI could not be trained to learn all those things. It would have to be somehow obtain all that information, but it needs to learn it and figure out that, oh, okay, so Hannibal is a cannibal, right? Okay, and I know what a cannibal is. Okay, so I got that. Right, this sentence here, I'm having an old friend for dinner. Let's just analyze that. Oh, I can see that there are multiple interpretations of that. Okay, so do I think that interpretation was intentionally ambiguous or unintentionally? I know he's a cannibal. What do these things mean? Could it be that it's intentional? Okay, on balance, I think probably it is intentional. Therefore, if I translate this as being I'm inviting a friend for dinner, I'll miss the subtlety in that utterance. So there's so much, there's so much to kind of take on board. There's so much context that's needed to do that job well. And then the question then is, you could do it, but should you do it? What is the economic cost of solving that problem? And will it be worth it at the end of the day? So our view right now is that, for the current tech and the way that it works, we just see that it is fundamentally limited in certain ways that mean humans really, for this kind of content, for conversational language, really, to preserve that authenticity, really need to be front and center of the process.
I mean, that particular example is one example. There's probably hundreds and hundreds of such decisions to be made inside a 2-hour movie, right? So maybe I get it right a few times, but it's probably not going to get it right all of the time, and it has to be consistent. And so, yeah, big challenge. You mentioned suspension of disbelief. So I think the script writing, humans in the loop, the voice, I mean, we have all these great, 11 Labs and all these artificial voices now that can even do like you can prompt it and say, produce a raspy pirate voice and things like that. That's just kind of new. I saw it on X a couple of days ago. But again, this is, I think the human will still be essential here for just to make it, get it to that level that he described. But what about the AI lip syncing? That would help in the suspension of disbelief, because one of the things that bothered me as a kid, because I grew up on dubbed German movies, dialogue was amazing. I mean, they put so much work into translation. James Bond's voice is James Bond's voice, and that's it. If you put a different voice there, it just wouldn't work. But the lip sync, so I think the AI lip syncing, do you feel this is something that may be coming sooner rather than later to bigger productions, and then the voice actor's output would be the basis of the AI lip syncing?
It's a great question. I think, again, it is really interesting technology. It definitely has a role to play. Speaking as a technologist, I know intuitively that it is solving the general case of that problem is actually really challenging. And of course, it's easy to see those Donald Trump clips and so on, where he's saying something completely different and his lips have been morphed to do it. Generally speaking, he's speaking to camera, so he's face on. He's not turning from side to side. Right? There's nothing occluding. There are no occlusions across his mouth. All those things add just huge complexity. I mean, it's like, it's an area where the 80-20 rule applies. You can solve it, 20% of the effort gets you 80% of the solution, but that remaining 20% is that's where the problems lie, actually coming up with solutions to all of those cases. So I just kind of caveat it with that, in that, the demos, nobody shows bad demos, right? You produce some tech, you show your best demos, not the ones that expose where it's flaws. So I just have that sort of slight skepticism about it. But nonetheless, again, as is any of this AI, as they say, today is the worst it's ever going to be. It's only going to improve from here. So I'm sure they'll get better at this. There'll be a question about whether there's an economic case to do that, depending on how much it will take to get that, to solve that general solution. But I think the bigger question is more of a human question here, isn't it? It's whether what difference that will make to audiences. Will that be transformational? Because there is a theory that that there are plenty of people around the world who don't watch foreign shows because they don't like reading subtitles, and they don't like imperfect dubbing. So that signals, as soon as they're watching something that's dubbed in a different language, and lips moving slightly differently from the words, it kind of turns them off. So I get that, and so here is a technology that could potentially solve that, because it has the potential of creating the illusion that a program is native to every viewer by creating this illusion that this person, in fact, each of the characters is speaking in the native language of the viewer. So I think it's intuitively it feels like that. Well, that there ought to be some value in that. But at the end of the day, I guess audiences will decide whether there is a value or not. And I'd be fascinated to see some audience reaction studies to that tech, and what difference it would make, and whether the imperfections that inevitably will arise will be just too jarring. It's kind of one of those situations where things you think something, it's going so well, and then suddenly something signals to you that you're being duped, and you feel cheated, that this isn't what I thought it was. And I think the negative reaction to that could be far greater than the positive experience of what that very thing is. So I think this human nature is such a big part of this particular thing that I think there needs to be some studies and some evaluations where it can be used. Certainly there are applications right now where it makes absolute sense. So places where they just need to in post correct something that was said, because they need to change the words or remove a swear word or whatever it may be, and clearly there are this tech is fantastic for that, because the costs of re-recording that would be huge in comparison. But as a general solution for dubbed soundtracks, whether that actually will float the boat of audiences, or whether it will be an economically viable approach to take, I think remains to be seen.
That's one of the things that we're hearing often, that the re-recording of individual segments is one of the low-hanging fruit that has been deployed quite widely over the past year, I guess, since this has become so much more available, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In lots of areas. I mean, it just for example, in entertainment generally, you go out and film something on, in a set or on location, and you get back and in post you find something that's kind of messed it up. Something's in shots that shouldn't be there, that you didn't spot at the time, or somebody says the wrong thing, or whatever it may be. And AI is an incredibly valuable tool for you to go in and make those kind of localized adjustments and corrections and changes to kind of address those kinds of things in a way that, even though that may be quite an expensive use of that tech, compared with the costs of hiring a studio and getting everybody back with building the set and so on, or getting the location booked again, is still a fraction of the cost. So,
and just maybe a couple other low-hanging fruit that you're using in day-to-day right now that you've started using, like AI. I mean, that's just used as a kind of broad term in the past 1 or 2 years.
A very kind of obvious one really is speech to text. So it's something that for us and for what we do, the starting point is always to in any of the localization we do, the starting point is always to create a very accurate, as recorded, annotated script of what all the utterances that appear in show, who's saying them, who they're saying them to, a whole bunch of information related to that. And we've looked at using speech to text technologies for years and years, and have been special cases where we've been able to use it, but for the kind of content that we deal with, they tend to be quite few and far between. Because when you have, in entertainment, obviously you have lots of background sounds, you have music and effects and so on. You have speakers speaking across one another. You have speakers in the background, and all these things for a long time have been very challenging for speech-to-text technologies to work with and produce a reliable output. And essentially what we found is that you could do a first pass in speech-to-text, which you'd always obviously go and then post-edit, but the effort required to post-edit that is sometimes it can be quicker just to actually do the thing from scratch. We've seen that change over the last couple of years. We've seen the advances in this kind of technology from third-party providers reach the point where actually it's now getting really, really good. And it's getting really good because obviously the algorithms have improved a bit, but more because the access to the training data to build these much more diverse models is transformational. That's the whole kind of premise behind LLMs in terms of text-based information, that you just throw an absolutely colossal amount of training data at something, and you can then suddenly you can infer and derive lots of different things. So I think speech-to-text is obviously an area that we use it. It's not a service that we sell to our customers because it's sort of a part of our internal process. It's something we have to do, and now we can do it with technology at a lower economic cost, but importantly, much more quickly. And actually, for our customers, the real drivers for them. We talked a little bit a short while ago about sort of trade-offs between quality and cost and so on. But for our customers, the biggest driver we're seeing actually is time to market. When they finish making a show, they just want to exploit that as soon as they possibly can. And so we're hearing time and time again that what can we do to reduce the turnaround time? And our applications of AI and indeed the other technologies around automation and so on that we work on are more focused on reducing the turn time. And we've got projects underway where we think that in certain areas we can make dramatic reductions in turnaround time by taking a kind of fresh approach and by exploiting some technologies, including AI, to have that kind of transformational kind of effect.
So that's their primary driver from the client side. They kind of care. They don't really care how the sausage is made in terms of localization, as long as it gets them there faster, right? I mean, cost, I'm sure, is an important component.
Oh, yeah.
But the speed is very important because the speed is money for them as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. So don't get me wrong. Yeah. So, the cost is always important. So they're certainly always looking for ways in which we can help them, support them to drive down costs of some of these things. But a real commercial driver for them is around the is time to market. Because when you think they're spending sums of the scale that I mentioned on creating that original content, well, the cost of localizing that content is a tiny fraction of what they're making it. So if you're going to, first of all, intuitively, if you're going to cut costs, probably the localization isn't the most obvious place to do that. But actually, the localization and that process and the media services that we spoke about earlier that kind of stand in the way of getting it onto the platform are what inhibits earlier distribution of the programming. And commercially, that's a much bigger driver. And as I say, hence the kind of initiatives that we're focused on are more around how we can get our product to market much more quickly.
So we're seeing like the Adobes of the world adding lip sync and dubs to their huge suite of product. We're seeing all these startups that are coming with a gazillion products. Like how do you think about this consumer media localization market that's now emerging? Is that something you don't want to look at, or do you even maybe think, well, why don't we build a product and spin up a page and have people pay $15 a month for it?
Yeah, it's back to the sort of horses for courses point, really, that in those kinds of markets, those consumer markets, so you're making your YouTube video and you're getting a pretty good audience out of the UK and or the US of English speakers, and that's earning you a nice income from the revenue share of YouTube. And you think, well, if I could extend this into some other countries, I could add additional audiences, and you look at, what is the economic cost to you of fulfilling that? So to go to someone like us and to produce, a very high quality, perfectly authentic, adaptation is a pretty big cost, and that's a risk to that YouTube creator. The alternative is to do it really cheaply, imperfectly, but at a much lower economic cost, and the cost of which is much easier to justify. So, even if you break even on an audience in France, well, why not do it? Because maybe the next video you make may be more appealing. So I think that is a huge market. I think that kind of creator economy is a huge opportunity for AI of lots of different kinds. Obviously, even in filmmaking, you've alluded to making completely synthetic movies as a real possibility. And I think it's already happening. I think I saw something the other day. But I think for Zoo, where we are focused is in supporting the needs of those high-end clients, and that's the theme that we are mining right now. It could be that we see opportunities in other areas too, and of course we'll look at those things. But for right now, that seems to be a different kind of problem that warrants and justifies a different kind of solution, where fully automated tech seems to have a great proposition, and there are others who are focused on that, and who I'm sure will make a great success of it.
Final question: the benefits and maybe challenges of being a publicly listed company, because you're one of the few, and there's fewer. One of your peers in London, Keyword Studio, was delisted, taken over by private equity, like half of the rest of the language industry. So how do you think about being publicly listed? What are some of the benefits, maybe some of the challenges, and why do you think there are more publicly listed companies in the language industry?
Very simplistically, the main reason to be quoted on a stock market is to have access to capital. It just gives you an opportunity to be able to attract funding from shareholders who can trade your shares. If what you're doing goes out of their favor, they can sell their shares, so they have liquidity in that investment. Liquidity actually is, on the AIM market, which is where Zoo is listed, is clearly it's a whole lot better than being a private company. As a private company, typically you have practically no liquidity. On the AIM market, you have some liquidity, but it's not that great. So as a small player, it's not a clear cut situation where the benefits outweigh the disadvantages. So it's a subject, obviously, that our board considers from time to time, of course. But on balance, we think that operating as a quoted company is overall is advantageous to us. Obviously, the challenges are mostly around the disclosure. As a public company, you need to be transparent. You need to share information not just with your shareholders, but with the public. And that means that it's for our competitors and others in our industry, it's much easier to find out information about Zoo than it is about all those other companies that you mentioned that are private equity backed or other forms of private capital backed. So it's a double-edged sword.
All right, so speaking of sharing information, I encourage everybody to go to Zoo's website and download the Will Robots Take Over the World of Localization white paper. Exceptionally well done. I don't think you even need to add your email, or maybe just your email, or you can just download it, right? So it's
right. You can do that.
That's very kind of you.
Enjoy.
So encourage everybody to go there and download that. Stuart, that was very, very interesting, fascinating. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thanks, Lauren.